Okay, folks, we were supposed to do the organ systems, the review, activity 2, I prefer to call them chapters. Chapter 2 from the lab book, which would have been a rat dissection and looking at all the same organs on the mannequin so you have a better orientation on humans. That didn't happen because of the hurricane. So, we moved on, but this is a video I'm going to make to at least cover the human side of it. Hopefully that will help you feel comfortable for the upcoming lab test 1. And so I have here, I pulled up the study guide. This is the exercise 2, chapter 2, organ systems overview, all the activities that you look at here. The other videos and the photos that you have will be able to help you prepare for things, but this table 1 at the end, I'm going to go through it with you. So let's start with in each organ organ, even the diaphragm. Each organ we're going to list what cavity is part of what organ system. Now the diaphragm, it's the muscle that lies under the lungs. The lungs are on top of that, and it's right here. You can see it sticking down right below the lungs. On one of the other models, it's more obvious. Let me see if I can bring one over to show you. I'll carry this out of the way so it's not blocking, but your lungs would be here, your abdominal cavity, so thorax with the pleura for the lungs. This is thorax, this is abdomen. The diaphragm, this layer of muscle, is the division between the two. And it's part of the respiratory system. When the diaphragm moves and drops, that's what causes the lungs to expand so you can exhale. All right. Now, your thymus, especially on a rat, you're going to be right here. It's going to be big. It'll actually hang down on the heart. Right here, they probably intend this to be thymus, but it would be the thymus or thyroid gland. I'm tempted to say thyroid gland, actually, because the thymus is bigger in the animals we work with. But also it's bigger in children, it gets smaller. But we're going to be talking this region. That's not one that I usually tag. So, Now the heart is below the lungs. I'm going to move this out of the way. Right and left so you can see the heart. And the heart here, I want you to notice a couple things. I want to talk about it's in the middle, the pericardial part in the mediastinum. The problem is cavity and cavity and cavity. So it's in the mediastinum, this is the middle of the thorax. It's the pericardium of the mediastinum, which is part of the thorax, which is part of the ventral cavity. There we go, we've included all the cavities. Kind of like those dolls that nest. Anyway, so this heart, a couple things I want you to get. The point is a little off to the side, a little towards the left. And when we do like I pledge allegiance, we usually get it wrong. We put our hand way too far over. The heart is closer to the middle, but a little bit off to the left. So this would be a more accurate way to put it. Anyway, here's your heart. Obviously, the organ system is the circulatory, and like I said, the body cavity would be the thorax, and the part of the thorax would be the pericardium. Okay, so we've got that. The lungs, you have them right here, okay? The right lung, the left lung. You notice the right lung is a little bigger. It has 3 lobes. The left lung, which is a little smaller, has 2 lobes. This notch here, where the left lung is missing mass, that's called the cardiac notch, because where it says the heart's a little off to the left, that's where it sits, is in that notch on the left lung. Now, remember, right lung, more lobes, more tissue, more bronchi. 1, 2, 3. Left, only 2 lobes, 1, 2. Less tissue, only 2 bronchi. So, not surprising, the right, oh, and while we're at it, right, the primary bronchus that goes down and divides into the secondary bronchi, it's closer to vertical. See, this is closer to horizontal. That's why the right one is more likely if someone has an obstruction, like if they have something that goes in the wrong pipe when they're talking and eating and swallowing, and it goes down, it's more likely to get lodged on the right because it's closer to vertical. It's easier for things to fall in there. Anyway, but heart, circulatory, lungs, respiratory, just like diaphragm is respiratory. And all of that thoracic cavity, which is the upper part of the ventral cavity. And inside the thoracic, we have the left pleural cavity, the mediastinum, the right pleural cavity. All right. Trachea. All right, we just looked at it a little bit, but I'll get this out, get the lungs out of the way. This vertical right here, going all the way from the back of the throat down to the division for the bronchi. You see all this, it looks like blue? Those are rings of cartilage. They're C-shaped rings of cartilage, and you can feel them on the outside of your body go bump, 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 going down. So that's the trachea. It's part of the conducting respiratory system. Basically saying it doesn't exchange gas. It carries gas to where you do gas exchange in the lungs. So the upper part of the respiratory system would be the conducting zone, and the trachea is the most conducting you can get. There's no gas exchange. Up here at the top of the trachea, we have a bunch of different cartilages that you're going to learn when you do the respiratory system. But one of them you're really familiar with, it's really obvious. It's this big one right here. It's the thyroid cartilage. It's right behind the thyroid. That's why I said this. I'm not sure if this is supposed to be thyroid or spleen. I would guess thyroid because it's right by. But touch your Adam's apple and then swallow. When you feel it go up. The Adam's apple is, in anatomy speak, the laryngeal prominence of the thyroid cartilage. Again, that's not a detail here that you need, but the trachea, we've charted where the trachea is. It goes down and divides into the bronchi. The trachea is part of the respiratory system. Bronchi, part of the respiratory system. Again, we're still in the mediastinum, the middle of the thoracic cavity, which is part of the ventral cavity. And we've already talked about how there are 3 to the right lung and 2 to the left. So you've got that. You can see they still have the C-shaped rings of cartilage that give them strength, rigidity. All right, talk to me later if you want to know why other animals have complete round rings all the way, O-shaped rings, we're going to see. Okay, the esophagus is behind the trachea. Right, so we have C-shaped rings. There's no cartilage here. That's because it's attached to the esophagus right there, like that, okay, I should say. So rings of cartilage, esophagus. And that normally is flat, but when you swallow, that's the tube that opens and passes food down to the stomach. So the esophagus is going to be, the organ system is going to be digestive system. The location is going to be on the back of the trachea running through the mediastinum. However, it will punch through, there's a hole. This is esophagus right here once we get below the trachea. That's going down to the diaphragm. And it's going to punch through the diaphragm to get to the stomach. So that's why the diaphragm has a little hole there. Anyway, but that's esophagus right there behind our trachea. All right, so we've got that. Stomach, it's below the liver. So we have the lungs, we have the diaphragm, everything above the diaphragm is thorax, everything below is abdominopelvic. Taking the liver out so we can get to the stomach. Here's our stomach, and the stomach has 3 layers of muscle. Most of the digestive system, like the esophagus, has 2 layers of muscle. This has 3 layers of muscle. It also has wrinkles inside the lumen that we call rugae. And Those wrinkles are like the wrinkles on the skin of a saguaro cactus that lets it swell to absorb all the water when it rains. Well, this lets the stomach swell to take up a higher volume, more food, more liquid. Anyway, so that's the stomach. Other parts of the stomach, I'll put this back together in a second. Other parts of the stomach that we should talk about. The bulge right here on the front, this is the fundus. The narrow part at the end where it hooks to the intestines is called the pylorus. There's actually a pyloric sphincter right there. That's a ring of muscle that pinches shut to keep things in the stomach until we're ready to pass them to the intestines. We don't pass it all at once, we pass a little bit of it, and then we use pancreatic fluids that neutralize the acid and have enzymes for digesting and stuff like that. So we get ready, release a little, neutralize and digest. Do more, instead of dumping it all out of the stomach at once. I shouldn't call it. Once we take the food, chew it up, swallow it to the stomach, mix it with the acid, we call it chyme, C-H-Y-M-E. Anyway, moving on. The stomach has a fundus, it has a greater curvature, it has a lesser curvature, it has a pylorus. The part between the pylorus and the fundus, right here, this would be called the body. Also, the stomach has an area right here around the esophagus that we call the cardiac region. Cardiac like heart. You're like, what? It's not circulatory. What are we talking about? Heartburn. You've heard people talk about, and the acid reflux and it goes up in the esophagus. The stomach is designed to handle acid. We have 3-4 different methods to control acid there. We can talk about them later. But the esophagus is not. So this area right around it, and the first part of the esophagus, this is the cardiac region. This is where you get heartburn. If you eat something spicy, eat too much, and you reflux and it burns, that's close to the heart. And so a lot of people think they're having a heart attack. That's why we started calling it the cardiac region. Anyway, so you've got that. And you know the stomach is part of the organ system. So no surprises there. The next thing on the list is the greater omentum, all right? Not well displayed on this model. Some of the other models are better, but think of a curtain of connective tissue and fat all in it, blood vessels as well. You have a sheet of thin connective tissue, there's globs of fat in it, and it forms a curtain over the intestines, especially over jejunum in here. That would be the omentum. And you have a greater and a lesser. And it's serous membrane, it contains the vessels to supply some of the organs. So you've got that going on as well. But it's organ system. If it was part of an organ system, I would say digestive, because it's supplying blood to and from some of your digestive organs. Anyway, all right, small intestine. We're looking at part of it here. There are 3 parts of the small intestine, and they're called the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. All right, so coming off of the pylorus, we have the duodenum, or some people say duodenum. I don't care which way you say it. But that is the first part of the small intestine, the first of 3, and it's also the main site of nutrient absorption, main site of digestion. The stomach is mostly storing the chyme, the chewed up food mixed with acid and enzymes, storing it, kneading it, mixing it back and forth to mix things well. There's not a lot of absorption in here. Maybe water, some alcohol, that's about it. Most of the nutrient absorption is in, I'm going to get this out of the way so you can see it, this first part of the small intestine. This is duodenum, okay? And what you're seeing right here, this is where the pancreatic fluid comes in. Okay, so here's our pancreas, and here's where we release the fluid to neutralize the acid coming off the stomach. Anyway, so the first part of your small intestine would be the duodenum, and that's mostly nutrient absorption. Now, the 3 parts are the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. This is mostly jejunum, okay? The jejunum all coiled around, this kind of looks like sausage coily stuff. That's the jejunum, and that's most of the length of the small intestine. Now it's really important. I want you to know the small intestine is named small because it's small diameter, not because it's short. It's actually longer than the large intestine. The large intestine, again, named because it is large diameter, not because of the length. Large intestine is shorter. So, duodenum, jejunum, and the last part is the ileum, okay? We do have ileum here on this model. It's right here, and it's right there. Ileum is the last part of the small intestine, and the valve that controls flow of food from the small intestine to the large intestine is flowing from the ileum to the cecum. And I guess I'll pull this out to make it easier. We have parts in the large intestine just like the small. So I'll repeat the small and then I'll go back on. So duodenum, jejunum, ileum, those are the small. The large, we have the cecum, and I want you to see a little piece of it right here. Looks almost like a little worm going on there. That's your appendix. Or in old anatomy books, they probably call it the vermiform appendix. It means in the form of the worm. That's the cecum, okay? The ileocecal valve controls the flow from ileum into the first part of the large intestine with the cecum there. And you're like, why would we emphasize such a tiny little thing? Well, it's a tiny little thing in humans. Some other animals, the cecum is bigger than the stomach, and it's used for all kinds of hindgut fermentation. Look it up, talk to me later, we can explain it. Anyway, when we get into our large intestine, we're going to come in cecum, and then we're going to have ascending colon, transverse colon. I didn't mean to drop that. We'll try that again. We will have our ascending colon, transverse colon, descending colon, sigmoid colon. That's like there's a little S shape as it moves towards the back. And then the back of it, from the sigmoid, you go down the rectum. Rectum refers to rectus because it's that straight little piece right above the anus. Okay, so that's large intestine. But we talked about the three parts of the small, duodenum, jejunum, ileum. You know where to find them. You know that the ileum is pretty small down here compared to the jejunum. I mean, most of what you see is jejunum. Anyway, so you got that. Remember I said the small intestine is mostly nutrient absorption, especially the duodenum. The large intestine, you make some B vitamins and you absorb a lot of fluid. This is mostly absorbing water so you don't lose it out of the body, compacting the feces to pass them out. Anyway, so small intestine, part of the organ system, digestion. The large intestine, same thing, digestion. The cecum, the very first part of the small intestine, the very first part of the large intestine. And I'm going to open this so you can see close. Here, there. Here, I just took the little window off the front. This is the ileum right here, okay? This is ileum. Right here we have the ileocecal valve that controls flow, and it will eventually let the future feces come in, and they could be in the cecum part or then ascending colon. With the cecum part here, you see how it looks like it goes down, and it does. That's the appendix, the vermiform appendix. So the opening to the appendix is much bigger than the whole appendix. Okay, so you've got that. Small intestine digestion, large intestine digestion, cecum, which is first part of large intestine digestion, rectum, which of course is, let's see. There, rectum would be where we have the straight part just above the anus. The anus has two sphincters, an internal and external. Those are what we relax when we want the rectum to contract and move feces out of the body. Okay, so you got that. That's still part of the digestion system. It's getting rid of the waste when we're done with digestion. All right, the mesentery is, hold on a second. Somebody's outside the room. I see what's going on.